I received a BMW for Christmas from my DIL. I thought it was an act of generosity, but when I took it in for a routine service, the mechanic asked me with a trembling voice, "Ma'am, who gave you this gift?" When I answered, he fell to his knees and said, "Do not drive it. What I found in the chassis shouldn't be there. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Judith, and at 62 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life to recognize when something felt wrong. I was mistaken." Christmas morning arrived with the same bitter cold that had been settling over our small Ohio town for weeks. I'd been living alone in my modest two-bedroom house since my husband Robert passed 3 years ago, and holidays had become quiet, predictable affairs. A cup of coffee, some toast, maybe a phone call from my son Seth if I was lucky. But this Christmas was different. I was still in my robe, barely awake, when I heard car doors slamming outside. Through my kitchen window, I could see Seth's familiar figure walking toward my front door, but he wasn't alone. Ever, my daughter-in-law, was with him, and behind them was something that made my coffee mug freeze halfway to my lips. A gleaming silver BMW sat in my driveway, so new it still had the dealer plates. The doorbell rang, and I could hear Ever's voice through the door, unnaturally bright and cheerful. "Merry Christmas, Mom Judith. We have a surprise for you." When I opened the door, Seth stood there with an expression I couldn't quite read. He'd always been my quiet boy, thoughtful and reserved. But there was something different about him today. His eyes wouldn't meet mine, and his smile seemed forced, like he was following a script he hadn't written. Ever, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with excitement. Her bleached blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and she was wearing one of those expensive coats that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She'd always been particular about appearances, but today she seemed almost manic. "Surprise," she squealed, throwing her arms around me in a hug that felt more like a performance than genuine affection. "We got you something very special this year." I looked between them, confused. Seth and Ever had been married for 8 years, and our relationship had always been complicated. She'd made it clear from the beginning that she thought Seth could do better than having a working-class mother from a small town. Christmas gifts between us were typically perfunctory: a scented candle, a gift card to a restaurant I'd never visit. "What's going on?" I asked, pulling my robe tighter against the cold. Ever grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Come see? You're going to love it." She practically dragged me out to the driveway, Seth following silently behind. The BMW was beautiful, I had to admit. The kind of car I'd seen in magazines but never imagined owning. The leather interior was visible through the windows, and everything about it screamed luxury. "It's yours," Ever announced, dangling a set of keys in front of my face. "Your very own BMW. We thought it was time you had something nice, something reliable. No more worrying about that old Honda breaking down." I stared at the car, then at them. My Honda was 15 years old and had seen better days, but it was paid off and got me where I needed to go. This BMW probably cost more than I made in 2 years working part-time at the local library. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "You bought this for me?" Seth finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We wanted to do something nice for you, Mom. You deserve it." But something in his tone made my stomach clench. He sounded like he was reciting lines, and his hands were shaking slightly. I'd raised this boy, changed his diapers, kissed his scraped knees. I knew when something was wrong. Ever, meanwhile, was practically bouncing on her toes. The dealer said it's top of the line. All the safety features, GPS, heated seats, everything. And the best part is, you can start driving it right now. Today. We already took care of the insurance and registration. "Right now?" I asked, feeling more confused by the minute. "But it's Christmas morning. Where would I need to go?" "Oh, anywhere." Ever's laugh sounded forced. "The grocery store, the library, maybe visit some friends. The important thing is that you start using it right away. Cars like this need to be driven regularly to keep them in good condition." I looked at Seth again, searching his face for some explanation. He was my only child, born when I was 27 and full of dreams about the family we'd build together. His father had left when Seth was 12, unable to handle the responsibility of a family, and it had been just the two of us for years. We'd been close once, before Ever came along. Now he stood there like a stranger, avoiding my eyes and fidgeting with his coat zipper. "This is very generous," I said carefully, "but I can't accept something this expensive. It must have cost—" "Don't worry about the cost," Ever interrupted, her voice sharp. "Seth got a big bonus at work and we wanted to share our good fortune. Besides, think of it as an investment in your safety. You're getting older and we worry about you driving that old car, especially in winter weather." The comment about my age stung, even though I knew she hadn't meant it kindly. Ever had a way of wrapping insults in concern, making it impossible to respond without looking ungrateful. "I appreciate the thought, but, Mom, please." Seth's voice was strained. "Just take it. For us. For me." There was something desperate in his voice that stopped my protests. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw dark circles under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that spoke of stress. He'd lost weight since I'd seen him last, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. "Are you okay, honey?" I asked, reaching toward him. Ever stepped between us before I could touch him. "He's fine. We're both fine. Everything's wonderful, which is why we wanted to do this for you." She pressed the keys into my palm. "Come on, let's take it for a test drive. I'll ride with you to make sure you're comfortable with all the features." "Now?" I looked down at my robe and slippers. "I'm not exactly dressed for—" "Oh, just around the block. You don't need to get dressed up for that." Ever was already opening the passenger door. "Come on, it'll be fun." Something about her insistence made alarm bells ring in my head. Why was it so important that I drive the car immediately? Why couldn't this wait until I was properly dressed, until I'd had time to process this overwhelming gift? "I think I'd rather wait," I said firmly. "Maybe after breakfast when I've had a chance to—" "Nonsense." Ever's voice had an edge now, though she was still smiling. "The sooner you start driving it, the sooner you'll feel comfortable. Trust me, once you experience how smooth it rides, you'll never want to drive anything else." Seth cleared his throat. "Maybe we should let Mom decide when she wants to—" "Seth." Ever's tone was sharp enough to cut glass. "We discussed this. The car needs to be driven regularly, especially in this weather. The longer it sits, the more problems it could develop." I watched this exchange with growing unease. There was clearly some tension between them about this gift, and I was starting to feel like a pawn in whatever game they were playing. "Look," I said, "I really appreciate this, but I need some time to think. This is a huge gift, and I'm not sure I can accept—" "You have to accept it." The words burst out of Ever with startling intensity. She immediately tried to cover with a laugh. "I mean, we already signed all the paperwork. It's in your name now, so technically it's already yours." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. They'd put the car in my name without asking me? Without even telling me they were planning this? "You put a car in my name without my permission?" I asked, my voice getting stronger. Ever waved dismissively. "It's a gift. We wanted it to be a surprise. Don't you like surprises, Mom Judith?" The way she said Mom Judith grated on my nerves. She'd been calling me that for 8 years, and it always sounded mocking, like she was humoring a child. "I need to go inside," I said, backing toward my front door. "I need to think about this." "What's to think about?" Ever's mask was slipping, and I could see something ugly underneath. "We do something incredibly generous for you, and your response is to be suspicious and ungrateful." "Ever, please," Seth said quietly, but she ignored him. "Do you have any idea how much this car cost? How much we sacrificed to buy it for you? And you can't even say thank you properly?" I felt heat rising in my cheeks. I did say thank you, but this feels wrong. I can't explain why, but something about this whole situation feels wrong. Ever's eyes narrowed. "Wrong? What could possibly be wrong about your family wanting to take care of you?" But that was just it. They'd never wanted to take care of me before. Ever had made it clear from the moment she met me that she thought I was beneath her, beneath Seth. She'd gradually driven a wedge between my son and me, finding excuses for why I couldn't visit, why family gatherings had to be at their house where she controlled every detail. And now, suddenly she wanted to give me a car worth more than my house? I'm going inside, I repeated, clutching the keys because I didn't know what else to do with them. Thank you for the gift, but I need some time. Ever started to say something else, but Seth grabbed her arm. Come on, he said. Let's let Mom process this. As they walked back to their car, I heard Ever hissing at Seth in a voice she thought I couldn't hear. This isn't going according to plan. She was supposed to be excited, supposed to want to drive it immediately. Plan? What kind of plan involved surprising someone with a car and insisting they drive it right away? I stood in my doorway, watching them drive away, the silver BMW sitting in my driveway like a beautiful threat. The keys felt heavy in my hand, and I couldn't shake the feeling that accepting this gift would be the biggest mistake of my life. What I didn't know was just how right that instinct would prove to be. For 3 weeks, the BMW sat in my driveway like a sleeping predator. Every morning when I opened my curtains, there it was, gleaming silver in the winter light. A constant reminder of that strange Christmas morning. I'd driven it exactly once, a short trip to the grocery store that left me more unsettled than before. The car was too quiet, too smooth, too perfect. Everything about it felt wrong in my hands, like I was wearing someone else's clothes that didn't quite fit. Seth had called twice to ask how I was enjoying my new ride, his voice still carrying that strained quality I couldn't shake from my mind. Ever had called 4 times, her questions increasingly pointed. Was I driving it regularly? How did it handle? Had I taken it on any long trips yet? The last question bothered me most. Why would she assume I'd want to take long trips? I was a homebody, always had been. My weekly outings consisted of grocery shopping, library visits, and occasionally dinner with my neighbor Margaret. I hadn't taken a long trip since Robert died, but Ever's persistence was wearing me down. During her most recent call, she'd become almost aggressive in her questioning. You need to drive it more, Mom Judith, she'd said, her voice tight with barely controlled irritation. Cars like that aren't meant to sit. The engine needs regular use. The battery needs charging. If you don't drive it soon, you're going to have problems. What kind of problems? I'd asked. Expensive problems. The kind that void warranties and cost thousands to fix. Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. It sounded less like helpful advice and more like a threat. That's what finally drove me to Tom's garage on that gray February morning. Not concern for the car's mechanical health, but a growing need to understand what I was dealing with. Tom Morrison had been fixing cars in our town for 35 years. He'd worked on my Honda since I bought it, always honest about what needed fixing and what could wait. If anyone could tell me whether Ever's warnings about the BMW were legitimate, it would be Tom. His garage sat on the edge of town, a rectangular building that had seen better days but housed some of the most reliable automotive expertise in 3 counties. The waiting room smelled like coffee and motor oil, with mismatched chairs and magazines from the previous decade. Tom emerged from the garage bay, wiping his hands on a rag, his weathered face creasing into a smile when he saw me. He was probably close to my age, with silver hair and the kind of steady presence that came from decades of solving other people's problems. Judith, haven't seen you in a while. How's the Honda treating you? Actually, I said, feeling oddly guilty, I'm not here about the Honda. I have a new car I'd like you to look at. Just a routine check, oil change, that sort of thing. Tom raised an eyebrow. New car? Well, that's news. What kind of upgrade did you make? It's a BMW. A Christmas gift from my son and daughter-in-law. Something flickered across Tom's expression. Surprise, maybe concern. A BMW? That's quite a gift. What year and model? I handed him the keys, and he glanced at the dealer tag that was still attached. His eyebrows shot up. This is a brand new car, Judith. Current year model. You sure you need a mechanic to look at it? These come with warranties and... I just want to make sure everything's okay, I interrupted. Call it peace of mind. Tom studied my face for a moment, then nodded. All right. Let me pull it into the bay and take a look. Should only take about an hour. I settled into one of the waiting room chairs with a cup of Tom's notoriously strong coffee, and tried to focus on a magazine article about winter gardening. But my mind kept wandering to Ever's phone calls, to Seth's strange behavior, to the way the car felt like it was watching me from my driveway. About 45 minutes later, I heard the hydraulic lift in the garage bay activate. Tom was apparently looking at the underside of the car, which seemed thorough for a simple oil change. A few minutes after that, the lift went down, and I heard footsteps approaching the waiting room. When Tom appeared in the doorway, his face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. "Judith," he said, his voice careful and controlled, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Who exactly gave you this car?" The tone of his voice made my stomach clench. "My son Seth and his wife Ever. Why? Is something wrong?" Tom looked around the empty waiting room, then pulled up a chair directly across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Judith, in 35 years of working on cars, I've never seen anything like what I just found under that BMW. What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his silver hair, clearly struggling with how to explain. "Someone has been under that car with tools. Recent work, not factory. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and they didn't do it to make the car run better." My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down with trembling hands. "I don't understand. What kind of work?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with something I'd never seen there before. Fear. "Judith, do you have any reason to believe that someone might want to hurt you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Hurt me? What are you talking about?" "The brake lines have been scored, not cut, but weakened so they'll fail gradually. The steering linkage has been altered in a way that would cause loss of control at highway speeds. And there's something in the engine compartment that—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "What?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What's in the engine compartment?" "A device I've never seen before, but it's clearly not factory equipment. It's connected to the fuel system and the electrical system. I'm not sure what it does, but I can tell you what it's designed to look like when it's done. An accident." The room seemed to tilt around me. "Are you saying someone tried to sabotage the car?" "I'm saying someone did sabotage the car. This isn't attempted anything, Judith. This is a fully operational trap disguised as a Christmas gift." I couldn't breathe. The waiting room suddenly felt too small, too hot, too bright. But that's impossible. Seth would never. He's my son. And Ever, she might be difficult. But she wouldn't. Tom reached over and gripped my hands in his calloused ones. "Judith, listen to me very carefully. Do not drive this car. Don't let anyone else drive it. Don't even start the engine. Some of what I found under there looks like it's designed to activate after a certain number of miles or engine starts." "How many miles have I driven it?" I whispered. "According to the odometer, about 200. I thought back to my few trips to the grocery store, the one visit to Margaret's house. "How many miles before?" "I don't know, but based on what I'm seeing, you've been incredibly lucky so far." My mind was reeling. "What do I do? Call the police?" "That would be my recommendation. But first, I think we should document everything I found. Take pictures, maybe get a second opinion from another mechanic." Tom stood up, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait, you said someone who knew exactly what they were doing did this. What does that mean?" He sighed heavily. "Judith, what I found under your car isn't the work of some amateur who watched a few YouTube videos. This was done by someone with serious mechanical knowledge, someone who understood exactly how to make a car fail in ways that would look accidental." "Does Seth know about cars?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Seth had never shown any interest in mechanical things. He could barely change his own oil. "Not that I've ever seen." "But that doesn't mean he doesn't know someone who does." The implication hit me like ice water. If Seth wasn't capable of doing this himself, then either he'd hired someone to do it or— "Ever," I breathed. "Ever's father owns an auto repair shop in Cleveland. She grew up around cars." Tom's expression grew even more grim. "That would explain the skill level I'm seeing. Judith, whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew how to make it look like mechanical failure rather than sabotage." I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. Why would they want to hurt me? I know Ever doesn't like me much, but this is attempted murder, Tom said bluntly. There's no other way to describe it. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of those words settling between us like a stone. My phone's been ringing all morning, I said suddenly, the realization making me feel sick. Ever keeps calling, asking if I've been driving the car, asking if I've taken any long trips. Tom's jaw tightened. She's been monitoring your mileage. But why? If they wanted to, if they wanted me dead, why give me a car? Why not just— Because this way looks like an accident, Tom explained gently. A tragic accident where a 62-year-old woman lost control of her new car. No one would question it, especially if it happened on a highway or during bad weather. The full horror of it began to sink in. They hadn't given me a gift. They'd given me a death sentence, wrapped up in a silver bow and presented with smiles and Christmas wishes. Tom, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What happens now? Now we call the police. And Judith? He looked directly into my eyes. Until we figure out exactly what's going on, you can't trust anyone. Not anyone. As if summoned by his words, my cell phone began ringing in my purse. The caller ID showed Ever's name, and suddenly her persistent calls took on a sinister new meaning. She wasn't calling to check on my satisfaction with the gift. She was calling to find out if I was dead yet. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant, a sterile environment that somehow made the horror of my situation feel even more surreal. Detective Sarah Martinez sat across from me in a small interview room, her dark eyes serious as she reviewed the photographs Tom had taken of the sabotaged BMW. Mrs. Holbrook, she said, looking up from the file. I want to make sure I understand this correctly. Your son and daughter-in-law gave you this car as a Christmas gift, and you're saying they modified it to kill you? The word sounded insane even to my own ears. I know how it sounds, Detective, but Tom Morrison has been working on cars for 35 years. He knows what he's looking at. Detective Martinez nodded slowly. Mr. Morrison's reputation is well established. His assessment carries weight with us. But I need to understand the why here. Do you have any idea what might motivate your son and daughter-in-law to want to harm you? I'd been dreading this question since Tom first showed me the photographs. I honestly don't know. Ever has never liked me much, but this— I gestured helplessly at the pictures. This goes beyond dislike. Tell me about your relationship with them. I took a deep breath, trying to organize 8 years of complicated family dynamics. Seth is my only child. His father left when Seth was 12, so it was just the two of us for a long time. We were close. Then he met Ever in college, and things changed. Changed how? She made it clear from the beginning that she thought I wasn't good enough. I worked at the library, lived in a small house, drove an old car. She came from money. Her father owned several auto repair shops in Cleveland. She was used to a different lifestyle. Detective Martinez made notes as I spoke. Did this create tension? Gradually, yes. Ever would make little comments about how I needed to better myself, or how Seth deserved someone who could appreciate his potential. She started finding excuses for why I couldn't visit, why family gatherings had to be at their house where she could control everything. And how did your son respond to this? That was the part that hurt most. Seth started pulling away. He'd call less often, visit less frequently. When we did see each other, Ever was always there, monitoring every conversation. It was like she was afraid of what we might say to each other. When was the last time you spoke to your son alone? I had to think about it. It's been over 2 years. She's always there, always listening. And Seth, he just lets it happen. Detective Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Holbrook, I need to ask you about finances. Do you have any significant assets? Life insurance? Property? I own my house outright. It's worth maybe $100,000. I have about $50,000 in savings from Robert's life insurance. Nothing that would make me a wealthy woman, but enough to live comfortably in retirement. Do you have a will? Yes. Everything goes to Seth. He's my only family. The detective's expression grew more serious. Has there been any recent discussion about your will? Any pressure to change it or update it? I shook my head. No. Seth has always known he'll inherit what little I have. There's never been any question about that. Detective Martinez made more notes, then closed the file. Mrs. Holbrook, we're going to need to examine your car more thoroughly. We'll also need to interview your son and daughter-in-law. In the meantime, I strongly advise you not to have any contact with them. What should I tell them if they call? Nothing. Don't answer. Don't return calls. If they show up at your house, call us immediately. As if summoned by her words, my phone rang. Ever's name appeared on the screen, and Detective Martinez gestured for me to answer it while she listened. "Hello, Ever," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mom, Judith, there you are. I've been trying to reach you all day. How's the car running?" The casual tone of her voice made my skin crawl. "It's fine. Have you been taking it out much? You really should drive it more. Cars like that need regular use to stay in good condition." Detective Martinez was writing furiously, noting every word. "I've been driving it some," I lied. "That's wonderful. Where have you been going? Anywhere exciting?" The question felt like a trap. "Just around town. You know, the usual places." There was a pause, and I could almost hear Ever calculating. "Well, you should think about taking a longer trip soon. Maybe drive down to visit your cousin in Kentucky. The highway driving would be good for the engine." My cousin lived 3 hours away on winding mountain roads, if the car was designed to fail at highway speeds. "I'll think about it," I managed. "Don't think too long. Cars like that need to be driven, not babied. Promise me you'll take it on a real trip soon?" "I promise," I said, the lie tasting bitter. "Wonderful. I'll talk to you soon. Love you." She hung up before I could respond, which was probably for the best since I couldn't have managed to say those words back. Detective Martinez looked at me grimly. "She's definitely monitoring your driving patterns. The pressure to take highway trips. The emphasis on longer distances. It all fits with what our forensics team is finding. What exactly did they find?" She hesitated, then seemed to decide I had a right to know. "The device in your engine compartment is a sophisticated piece of equipment. It's designed to activate after a specific number of engine starts or when the car reaches certain sustained speeds. Once activated, it would cause multiple system failures simultaneously." I felt sick. "How many engine starts?" "Based on the settings, approximately 50. You've started the car 43 times. 7 starts. I'd been 7 starts away from death." "The brake line scoring was done with precision tools," she continued. "It would have caused gradual failure, but the failure would accelerate under highway conditions or emergency braking. Combined with the steering modifications and the electronic device, you would have lost complete control of the vehicle. Would I have suffered?" The question came out before I could stop it. Detective Martinez's expression softened. "The forensics team believes it would have been quick. Devastating, but quick. Small comfort, but I supposed it was something. Detective, what happens now?" "We continue our investigation. We'll need to examine your son and daughter-in-law's finances, their recent activities, any connections they might have to automotive professionals who could have done this work. You mentioned Ever's father owns auto shops. We'll definitely be looking into that connection. This level of sophistication suggests professional knowledge and access to specialized tools." A terrible thought occurred to me. "Detective, if they were willing to do this to me, are there others? Has this happened before?" The detective's pause told me everything I needed to know. "We're looking into that," she said carefully. "There was a case in Cleveland 2 years ago. An elderly woman died in what appeared to be a mechanical failure. Same make and model car, similar circumstances. Ever's father's shop had serviced that vehicle shortly before the accident." My blood turned to ice. "How many people have they killed?" "We don't know yet, but Mrs. Holbrook, you may have just helped us uncover something much larger than we initially thought." The room seemed to spin around me. It was one thing to discover that my own family wanted me dead. It was another entirely to realize they might be serial killers using Christmas gifts and family connections to cover their tracks. "I need some air," I said, standing up on shaky legs. Detective Martinez stood as well. "Mrs. Holbrook, I know this is overwhelming, but you've been incredibly brave. Your decision to have that car checked may have saved not just your life, but the lives of other potential victims." As I walked out of the police station into the cold February afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Seth. I stared at his name on the screen, remembering the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who brought me dandelions he'd picked from the yard and called them flowers. That child was gone, replaced by a stranger who smiled while planning my death. I declined the call and blocked his number. Walking to Tom's garage where I'd left my old Honda, I realized something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The grieving mother who'd spent years making excuses for her son's behavior was gone. In her place was a woman who understood, with crystal clarity, that some bonds can be broken beyond repair. The only question now was what I was going to do about it. 3 days after my visit to the police station, I sat in my living room, staring at documents that Detective Martinez had allowed me to review. Bank records, phone logs, surveillance photos. The investigation was moving faster than I'd expected, and what they were uncovering made my stomach turn. "Your son and daughter-in-law have been very busy," Detective Martinez had said when she'd called that morning. "We need to show you what we've found." Now, looking at the evidence spread across my coffee table, I understood why her voice had carried that particular tone of disgust that law enforcement reserved for the worst cases. Seth and Ever weren't just in debt, they were drowning in it. Casino receipts showed gambling losses totaling over $200,000 in the past 18 months. Credit card statements revealed cash advances that had been immediately converted to more gambling funds. There were threatening letters from loan sharks, second mortgages on their house, and something that made my blood run cold: a life insurance policy on me that I'd never known existed. "When did they take out this policy?" I asked Detective Martinez, my voice barely above a whisper. 14 months ago. $2 million with your son listed as the sole beneficiary. They've been paying the premiums religiously. It's actually the only bill they haven't defaulted on." $2 million. I stared at the number, trying to process it. My entire estate wasn't worth more than $150,000, but somehow I was worth 20 times that amount dead. How is that even legal? How can someone take out a life insurance policy without the person knowing? Detective Martinez's expression was grim. It shouldn't be. But if you look at the signature on the application. She showed me a copy of the policy application. There, in what looked like my handwriting, was my signature. Below it, a notary stamp and witness signatures I didn't recognize. "That's not my signature," I said, studying the document more carefully. "It's close, but it's not mine." "We figured as much. Our handwriting expert agrees. It's a skilled forgery, but definitely not genuine. Ever has access to documents with your real signature through Seth, and we believe she practiced until she could replicate it convincingly." I thought about all the birthday cards and Christmas cards I'd sent over the years, all bearing my genuine signature, all the legal documents Seth might have seen when helping me with Robert's estate after he died. So they forged my signature to take out a life insurance policy, then gave me a death trap disguised as a Christmas gift. That's what the evidence suggests, but it gets worse. I didn't think it could get worse, but Detective Martinez pulled out another set of documents. We've been tracking their communications over the past year. Text messages, emails, phone calls. They've been planning this for a long time, and they've been very thorough. She showed me printed copies of text messages between Seth and Ever. Reading them felt like swallowing broken glass. Ever. The old bitch changed her will again. Everything goes to some cat shelter now instead of Seth. Can you believe that? Seth. What? When did she change it? Ever. Last month. I saw the papers when I was at her house. We need to move faster. Seth. I don't know if I can go through with this. Ever. Don't be weak. She's old. She's alone. She's never done anything worthwhile with her life. At least this way her death will mean something. It'll save us. I had to stop reading. The casual cruelty of Ever's words was devastating, but what hurt more was Seth's response. Not outrage at the suggestion, but worry about his own ability to go through with it. "Detective," I said, my voice shaking, "I never changed my will. Everything still goes to Seth." She looked confused. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely certain. I haven't modified my will since Robert died 3 years ago." Detective Martinez made notes. "So, where did Ever get the idea that you'd changed it?" I thought back to the past few months, trying to remember any conversation that might have given Ever that impression. Then it hit me. "The cat shelter," I said suddenly. "About 2 months ago, I started volunteering at the animal shelter downtown. Ever asked me about it during one of her phone calls, and I mentioned that I was thinking about making a small donation in Robert's memory." "How small?" $500, maybe 1,000. Just something to honor his memory. He loved animals. Detective Martinez stared at me. "You think she misunderstood and believed you were leaving your entire estate to the shelter?" "It's possible. Ever has a way of hearing what she wants to hear, especially if it fits whatever narrative she's building in her head." We continued reading through the messages. The planning was meticulous and chilling, Ever. "Dad says the modifications will look like normal wear and tear. No one will question mechanical failure in a car that old." Seth. "The BMW isn't old, it's brand new." Ever. "I meant her old car, idiot, but this is better. New car, inexperienced with the controls, winter weather conditions. Perfect storm for an accident." Seth. "What if she doesn't drive it enough? What if she keeps using the Honda?" Ever. "Leave that to me. I'll make sure she drives it." The next set of messages detailed their surveillance of my daily routine. They'd been watching me for weeks, noting when I left the house, where I went, what routes I took. They knew I grocery shopped on Tuesdays, went to the library on Thursdays, visited Margaret on Sunday afternoons. Ever. "She took the car to the grocery store today. Only started it twice, though. We need her to use it more." Seth. "Maybe we should suggest she visit her cousin in Kentucky. That would put enough miles on it." Ever. "Good idea. I'll call her tomorrow and plant the seed." The conversation I'd had with Ever at the police station suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't been making casual suggestions. She'd been trying to manipulate me into driving to my death. But the most disturbing discovery was a series of messages from 3 months ago, around the time they would have been planning their Christmas surprise. Ever. "I've been thinking about your mom's accident." Seth. "What accident?" Ever. "The one we're going to arrange. How sad it will be. How unexpected. How we'll be devastated by the loss." Seth. "Don't joke about that." Ever. "I'm not joking. I'm practicing. We need to be convincing when it happens. Grieving son and daughter-in-law. Tragic loss. Life insurance claim to help us through our difficult time. Seth. "This feels wrong." Ever. "What feels wrong is being broke while your mother sits on $50,000 she'll never use. What feels wrong is watching you work yourself to death while she lives comfortably in retirement. She's had her turn. Now it's ours." "Detective," I said, setting down the papers with trembling hands, "how long have they been planning this?" "Based on these messages, at least 6 months of active planning. But we found earlier communications that suggest Ever has been thinking about this possibility for much longer." She showed me older messages, dating back almost 2 years. Ever. "Your mom is going to live forever just to spite us. She'll probably make it to 90 out of pure stubbornness." Seth. "Don't say things like that." Ever. "I'm just saying, we could be waiting another 30 years for our inheritance. 30 years of being broke while she hoards money she doesn't need." Seth. "She's not hoarding anything. She lives modestly." Ever. "She lives like a miser while we struggle. It's not fair, Seth. You're her only child. You should be her priority." I could see how the poison had been administered slowly, a drop at a time, until Seth's natural love for me had been twisted into resentment. "There's one more thing," Detective Martinez said gently. "We found evidence that this isn't their first attempt." My blood went cold. What do you mean? Last summer, there was a carbon monoxide leak in your house. Do you remember? I did remember. I'd been feeling sick for several days. Headaches, nausea, exhaustion. Finally, Margaret had insisted I call the gas company. They'd found a leak in my heating system and fixed it immediately. The repair records show that someone had tampered with your furnace connections. It was subtle enough to look like normal wear, but our experts believe it was intentional. They tried to poison me with carbon monoxide? It appears so. But either they lost their nerve or you got it fixed too quickly for their plan to work. I remembered Seth visiting that week, ostensibly to check on me because Ever had mentioned I sounded tired on the phone. He'd seemed nervous, kept checking his watch, and left earlier than usual. At the time, I'd attributed it to work stress. Now I realized he'd been waiting for me to die. How many times have they tried to kill me? I asked, the question coming out as barely a whisper. Detective Martinez consulted her notes. We've identified at least 3 attempts over the past year. The carbon monoxide incident, a suspicious fall you took on your front steps last autumn, we found evidence those steps had been deliberately loosened, and now the car. 3 times. My own son had tried to murder me 3 times, and I'd been completely oblivious. Why didn't any of their previous attempts work? You're more resilient than they expected, and you have good instincts. You called for help with the carbon monoxide. You had the steps repaired after your fall, and you brought the car to Tom for inspection instead of just driving it until it killed you. I sat in silence, processing the enormity of what I'd learned. My son, the baby I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, the child I'd sacrificed everything to raise, had been systematically trying to murder me for money. But what hurt most wasn't the attempts on my life. It was the realization that the son I'd loved and mourned for years was already gone. He'd been replaced by a stranger who could discuss my death with the same casual tone he might use to plan a vacation. What happens now? I asked. Now we arrest them. We have enough evidence for attempted murder charges, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. They won't be able to hurt you or anyone else. As Detective Martinez gathered the documents, my phone rang. Seth's name appeared on the screen. I'd forgotten to block his number after our last conversation. Don't answer it, the detective advised, but something in me wanted to hear his voice one more time, to see if there was any trace left of the son I'd loved. I answered the call. Mom? Seth's voice sounded strained, desperate. We need to talk. Mom? Seth's voice cracked through the phone, and for a moment he sounded like the frightened little boy who used to call for me during thunderstorms. We need to talk. Detective Martinez was shaking her head frantically, mouthing, "Hang up," but something in Seth's tone made me pause. There was desperation there, fear, maybe even regret. Against my better judgment, I wanted to hear what he had to say. About what, Seth? I kept my voice neutral, watching the detective's expression grow increasingly concerned. It's Ever. Mom, I think she's lost her mind. She keeps talking about you driving that car more, taking longer trips. She's obsessed with it, and I'm starting to think. He trailed off, and I could hear him breathing heavily. You're starting to think what? I think she did something to it. To the car. Something bad. Detective Martinez was writing furiously, her eyes wide. This wasn't what any of us had expected. What kind of something? I asked, my heart pounding despite myself. I don't know exactly, but she's been acting strange ever since we gave it to you. She keeps asking me about your driving habits, whether you've taken any highway trips. And yesterday, I overheard her on the phone with her father, talking about timing and... Mom, I think she's trying to hurt you. The performance was Oscar-worthy. If I hadn't seen the text messages with my own eyes, I might have believed him. But I had seen them. I knew he was just as guilty as ever, just as calculating, just as willing to watch me die for money. That's a serious accusation, Seth. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm scared. For you, I think you should stop driving the car until we can figure out what's going on. Detective Martinez handed me a note. Keep him talking. We're tracing the call. Where are you calling from? I asked. A gas station outside town. I told Aver I was going to pick up groceries. but I needed to call you without her hearing. Mom, please, you have to listen to me. Don't drive that car anymore. The irony was almost laughable. After months of planning my death, Seth was now pretending to be my savior, probably hoping that if he could convince me to stop driving, they could regroup and try again with a different method. Seth, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Anything, Mom. Are you in financial trouble? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Seth's voice came back, barely above a whisper. How did you know? I've been your mother for 28 years. I know when something's wrong. Another long pause. It's bad, Mom. Really bad. We owe money to people who don't take no for an answer. How much money? 200,000, maybe more. Detective Martinez's eyebrows shot up. So far, Seth was telling the truth about their debts, even if he was lying about everything else. How did it get so bad? Ever thought she had a system for the casinos? She was so confident, so sure she could beat the odds. At first, she was winning, and it felt like we'd found the answer to all our problems. But then the house always wins. I finished. Yeah. And when we started losing, she said we just needed to bet bigger to win back what we'd lost. It became this horrible cycle, and before I knew it, we'd mortgaged everything and it still wasn't enough. I could hear the genuine anguish in his voice, and despite everything I knew about his involvement in the murder plot, a small part of me still ached for the son I'd raised. But that didn't change what he'd done. Seth, why didn't you come to me? You know I would have helped if I could. Ever said you'd just lecture us about being irresponsible. She said you'd make us feel worse about ourselves, and we were already drowning in guilt and shame. Another expertly crafted lie. Based on the text messages I'd seen, Ever had actively discouraged Seth from asking me for help, preferring the insurance money solution to any form of assistance that would keep me alive. So, what are you going to do now? I asked. I don't know. Maybe declare bankruptcy. Try to start over, but Mom, right now I'm more worried about you. Please promise me you won't drive that car until we can have it checked by a mechanic. What kind of mechanic did you have in mind? Not Ever's father, Seth said quickly. Someone independent. Someone who doesn't know our family. Detective Martinez wrote another note. He's trying to control the investigation. Of course he was. If I took the car to a mechanic of their choosing, they could either ensure the sabotage wasn't discovered, or they could claim ignorance if it was found. Either way, they'd have plausible deniability. Seth, I have a question about the car. What kind of question? How did you afford it? A new BMW costs at least $40,000. If you're in debt for $200,000, where did the money come from? The silence told me I'd caught him off guard. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Ever's father gave us a deal. A really good deal. What kind of deal? He had it on his lot for months. Couldn't sell it because of some cosmetic damage. He let us have it for practically nothing in exchange for fixing the bodywork. Another lie, and not even a good one. I'd seen the car. There was no evidence of any bodywork, and it was clearly brand new, not a lot vehicle that had been sitting unsold. That was generous of him. Yeah, he's been really supportive during our rough patch. I bet he had been. Supportive enough to help sabotage a car for his daughter's murder plot. Seth, I want you to come home. Tonight. We need to talk about this face to face. I can't. Ever's expecting me back, and if I'm gone too long, she'll get suspicious. Suspicious of what? Of me talking to you. She doesn't like it when we have conversations without her being involved. That much, at least, was probably true. Ever had spent years ensuring she was present for every interaction between Seth and me, controlling the narrative and preventing any genuine communication. Then bring her with you? Absolutely not. Mom, you don't understand how unstable she's become. I'm genuinely afraid of what she might do if she feels cornered. Detective Martinez handed me another note. We have enough. Tell him you'll stop driving the car. All right, Seth. I'll stop driving the BMW until we can figure out what's going on. Thank you. God, thank you. I was so scared something would happen to you. The relief in his voice sounded genuine, which made his deception even more chilling. He was either a sociopath or the world's best actor. Will you call me tomorrow to check in? Of course. And Mom? I love you. I know things have been complicated between us, but you're still my mother, and I don't want anything to happen to you. After I hung up, Detective Martinez and I sat in silence for several moments. What do you think? She finally asked. I think he's trying to play both sides, I said. He wants to distance himself from Ever's actions while still maintaining the possibility that I might die in some other accident that he can claim ignorance about. The call was traced to a location 3 blocks from their house. He's not at a gas station. He's at a payphone outside a convenience store. I wasn't surprised. Everything about the conversation had been carefully orchestrated, probably with Ever's input. What happens now? Now we let them think their new strategy is working while we finish building our case. We want to catch them in the act of planning their next attempt. The detective gathered her papers and prepared to leave, but I stopped her. Detective, I want to make one thing clear. When you arrest them, I want to be there. She looked surprised. Mrs. Holbrook, I understand your anger, but family confrontations can become volatile. I'm not talking about a confrontation. I'm talking about justice. For 8 years, Ever has controlled every interaction I've had with my son. She's manipulated him, isolated me, and ultimately convinced him to try to kill me. When this ends, I want her to see my face and know that I beat her. Detective Martinez studied my expression for a long moment. All right, but we do this by the book, and you follow our lead. After she left, I sat in my living room thinking about the conversation with Seth. Despite everything I knew about his involvement in the murder plot, hearing his voice had stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried. But those emotions weren't love or forgiveness. They were something darker, more complex. For years, I'd mourned the loss of my relationship with Seth, blaming myself for not being a good enough mother, not understanding his needs, not finding a way to connect with him despite Ever's interference. Now I understood that the son I'd been mourning was already gone, replaced by a stranger who could discuss my death with casual indifference. The Seth who had called me tonight was just another lie, another manipulation, another attempt to control me. My phone rang again. This time it was Ever. Mom, Judith, Seth told me he called you. I'm so sorry if he worried you with his wild theories. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of wild theories? He's been under so much stress with work, and he started imagining all sorts of conspiracy theories. He actually suggested that I might have done something to your car. Can you believe that? Her laugh was bright and artificial, like glass breaking. That does sound far-fetched, I agreed. I knew you'd understand. Seth loves you so much, and he's just looking for someone to blame for his anxiety. Unfortunately, he's decided to blame me. That must be difficult for you. It is. But I'm trying to be patient with him. Stress can make people paranoid, and Seth has always had a tendency toward anxiety. She was already building her defense, painting Seth as mentally unstable while positioning herself as the long-suffering wife trying to hold the family together. Ever, can I ask you something? Of course. If Seth is really worried about the car, why don't we have it inspected, just to put his mind at ease? There was a brief pause, so quick I might have missed it if I hadn't been listening carefully. That's a great idea. I'll call my father tomorrow and see if he can recommend someone trustworthy. Actually, I was thinking of someone independent, someone without any connection to your family, just to avoid any appearance of bias. Another pause, longer this time. Well, I suppose that would be fine, though I can't imagine what they'd find. The car is brand new, after all. Of course, I'm sure it's nothing. Exactly. But if it makes Seth feel better, then I'm all for it. After I hung up, I realized something had shifted in my perspective. The grieving mother who had spent years making excuses for her son's behavior was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that some betrayals were unforgivable and some relationships were beyond repair. Tomorrow, Detective Martinez would begin setting up the surveillance that would catch Seth and Ever planning their next attempt on my life. And when that happened, I would be ready to watch the people who had tried to kill me face the consequences of their choices. For the first time in 8 years, I was no longer under Ever's control, and I intended to make sure she understood exactly what that meant. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after my conversation with Detective Martinez. I was sitting in an unmarked police car outside Seth and Ever's house, watching as officers surrounded the property. My heart was steady, no rapid beating, no nervous trembling, just a calm certainty that justice was finally being served. Through the surveillance equipment we'd placed in their home, we'd heard everything. Ever's increasingly frantic calls to her father about accelerating the timeline. Seth's weak protests that maybe we should wait, followed by his quick agreement when Ever reminded him about their mounting debt and the loan sharks who were growing impatient. Most damning of all, we'd recorded their discussion about staging a break-in at my house, during which they would tamper with my gas lines to create a delayed explosion. Ever had even researched the blast radius to ensure it would look like an accidental gas leak rather than sabotage. "They're going in," Detective Martinez said, her voice coming through the radio. I watched as officers approached the front door. Through the window, I could see Ever in her kitchen, still wearing the silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked up when the doorbell rang, and even from this distance, I could see her expression change from mild curiosity to shock to something approaching panic. Seth appeared behind her, still in his work clothes from the night before. He'd been sleeping on their couch lately, according to the surveillance reports. Apparently, the stress of planning multiple murders was taking a toll on their marriage. The front door opened, and I heard Detective Martinez's voice over the radio. "Ever Holbrook, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and forgery." Even at this distance, I could hear Ever's shriek of outrage. "This is insane! I haven't done anything! This is harassment!" Seth's voice was quieter, but the microphones picked it up. "How did you know?" That single question confirmed his guilt more clearly than any evidence we'd collected. Not, "What are you talking about, Your Honor? There must be some mistake." Just, "How did you know?" 20 minutes later, they were both in handcuffs, being led to separate police cars. Ever was still protesting, still claiming innocence, still trying to manipulate the situation. Seth walked in silence, his head down, the weight of his choices finally settling on his shoulders. As they drove past our surveillance car, Ever turned and looked directly at me through the tinted window. She couldn't see me, but something in her expression suggested she knew I was there. Her face was twisted with a rage so pure it was almost frightening. Seth didn't look. He kept his head down, and I wondered if he was finally experiencing shame, or if he was just calculating his next move. Detective Martinez got back in the car, pulling off her bulletproof vest. "It's done," she said simply. "What happens now?" Now they face trial. The evidence we have is overwhelming. The surveillance recordings, the physical evidence from the car, the forged insurance documents, the financial records showing their gambling debts. Their lawyers will probably try to negotiate plea deals. I nodded, watching as the police cars disappeared around the corner. "Detective? Will I have to testify?" "Probably. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about facing Seth and Ever in court, about having to recount the ways they'd tried to kill me, about seeing them try to manipulate a jury the way they'd manipulated me for years. "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." The trial took place 6 months later. By then, I'd had time to process everything that had happened, to grieve the relationship with my son that I'd lost years before I understood it was gone. Ever's defense team tried to paint her as a devoted wife driven to desperation by her husband's gambling addiction. They argued that Seth was the mastermind, that Ever was simply a victim of his manipulation. It might have worked if we hadn't had recordings of her voice calmly discussing the best methods to make my death look accidental. Seth's lawyers took the opposite approach, claiming that Ever had systematically manipulated him into believing that my death was the only solution to their problems. They portrayed him as a weak man controlled by a stronger, more ruthless woman. The truth, as it often is, was more complicated. They'd manipulated each other, feeding off each other's greed and desperation until they'd convinced themselves that murder was acceptable, even necessary. When it came time for me to testify, I looked at my son sitting at the defendant's table and felt nothing but pity. Not love, not anger, not even disappointment. Just pity for a man who had traded his soul for money and found himself bankrupt in every way that mattered. Ever stared at me with undisguised hatred as I recounted the details of their plot. She'd never forgiven me for surviving, for outsmarting her, for refusing to die on schedule. In her mind, I was still the obstacle standing between her and the life she felt she deserved. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Ever was sentenced to 25 years to life. Seth received 20 years with the possibility of parole in 12, his cooperation with authorities and expression of remorse earning him a slightly reduced sentence. As they were led away, Ever turned back one last time, her voice carrying across the courtroom. "This isn't over, Judith. You may have won today, but you'll never be free of us." But she was wrong about that. I sold my house 3 weeks after the sentencing and moved to a small coastal town in Maine where nobody knew my story. I'd always loved the ocean, and Robert and I had talked about retiring somewhere near the water. It seemed like the right time to honor that dream. My new house is modest. 2 bedrooms, a small garden, a view of the harbor from my kitchen window. I volunteer at the local animal shelter, teach reading to adults at the community center, and have coffee with my neighbor Dorothy every Thursday morning. I don't think about Seth and Ever every day anymore. Sometimes weeks pass without them crossing my mind. When they do, it's not with anger or sadness, but with a kind of distant amazement that I survived their attempts to destroy me. The life insurance policy they'd taken out in my name was voided due to fraud, and I used the modest settlement from the insurance company's apology to help other elderly people who'd been victims of financial exploitation. It felt right, turning their greed into something that could help others. 6 months ago, I received a letter from Seth. He's eligible for parole in 8 years, and he wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow rebuild the relationship we'd lost. The letter was 3 pages long, filled with the kind of psychological insights that suggested he'd been through extensive therapy in prison. I read it once, then threw it away. Not out of anger, but out of understanding. The person who wrote that letter was a stranger to me, just as the person who'd planned my death had been. Whatever relationship we'd once had died long before I learned about the sabotaged car. Some people might call that cold or unforgiving. I call it peaceful. Yesterday, while walking along the beach near my house, I found a piece of sea glass. Smooth, green, beautiful in its transformation from something broken into something whole again. I brought it home and placed it on my windowsill, where it catches the morning light and throws tiny rainbows across my kitchen wall. It's a good metaphor for what I've become. The sharp edges of anger and betrayal have been worn smooth by time and distance. I'm not the same woman who stood in her driveway on Christmas morning, confused by an expensive gift from family members who'd never shown her such generosity before. That woman was naive, desperate for love from people who saw her only as an obstacle to overcome. She spent years making excuses for behavior that should have been inexcusable, accepting crumbs of affection from people who were planning her death. I'm someone different now, someone stronger, more discerning, more protective of my own peace. I've learned that love isn't about blood relations or family obligations. It's about genuine care, mutual respect, and the simple desire to see someone thrive. I have that now, in small ways that matter more than I ever imagined they could. Dorothy brings me soup when I have a cold. The teenagers at the animal shelter light up when they see me coming. The adults in my literacy class thank me for helping them discover the joy of reading. These connections aren't complicated by history or manipulation or hidden agendas. They're clean, honest, and freely given. They're what love actually looks like when it's not poisoned by selfish motives. This morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and the sound of seagulls calling to each other over the harbor. My first thought wasn't about what threats the day might bring or who might be trying to hurt me. It was simply gratitude for being alive to see another beautiful day. That's what true freedom feels like. Not the absence of problems, but the absence of fear. For the first time in my 63 years, I'm exactly where I belong, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can give them. Seth and Ever tried to end my story with a rigged car and a forged insurance policy. Instead, they gave me the greatest gift they could have given. They freed me from the toxic family bonds that had been slowly strangling the life out of me for years. I'm grateful for that liberation, even as I mourn the cost it took to achieve it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who are determined to destroy you, even if those people share your DNA. Sometimes the family you choose is more real than the family you were born into. As I sit here in my sunlit kitchen, watching the waves roll in beyond my garden, I know with absolute certainty that I made the right choice. I chose life, not just survival, but genuine, joyful, peaceful life. And for the first time in decades, that life is entirely my own. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.